Hello. Good morning.
Hello.
How are you?
Hello. Yes, we're good. We're all here.
Good. Oh,
Hail, hail.
nice. Hail,
Okay, whose
hail, the
bris was
gang's
it?
all here.
So whose bris was it?
It was the family, it was Leslie and Tom Silverstein's grandson, their daughter Ariel, who lives in Skokie, and it was at Skokie Valley. And so they are members of Darchei Noam in
Okay, that's where I know the name from.
yeah. And then right after that, there was a wedding. It was a second wedding for this couple. That was at noon. So it
The
went
wedding
from,
in
yeah,
really?
well, it was a second wedding. It was just a small affair, just like
Oh,
a little something.
wow.
And the yeah, so it was bris to wedding. So it was a success.
Mazel tovs and
Still
mazel
good.
tovs. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
that's the way it should be.
I agree.
Okay. So
Right, let us see here. I have to.
is David joining us? Maybe. He's got to put his pants on.
I'll go and get him in a minute.
Make sure he's dressed.
Okay, I'm going on mute.
Okay. Okay. So I believe this is where we are. Mitzvah, negative commandment 262. We're talking about an Amma Ivriya. This is I don't think we're there yet. No, we're not there yet. Oh no, I remember where we are. Now I remember what we were doing. We're doing a regular slave. There it is. This is the one. He prohibited us, so this is 254, negative commandment 254. He prohibited us from returning a slave who ran away from outside the land of Israel to his master. Even though his master is an Israelite, since he ran away from outside of Israel, he is not returned to him. Rather, he should free him and write his value against him as a debt to his master, and that is his may be exalted, saying, you shall not return over a slave to his master. And it is explained in Gittin that the verse is speaking about a slave that is running away from outside the land of Israel to Israel, such that the law about him is that the Israelite who found him should write a deed of obligation for his value against him and write him a bill of emancipation. Under no circumstances should he be made to go back to being a slave, so as to allow him to reside in a place of purity chosen for the glorious assembly, and the regulations of this command have been explained there. So this is what it sounds like. It sounds like
to pay
yeah,
the owner of the slave.
the slave himself is going to have to pay.
Oh, how?
Well, he's now free. He just owes him the money. He may not have it yet, but he's going to owe him to compensate him. Yeah, so that's one of the steps here that there's several steps here that need to be explained. First of all, why is it that if this seems to only be talking about a case where the owner is not in the land of Israel, and the one who found this person to be a slave and figured the whole thing out is in the land of Israel with the slave. That seems to be the only scenario that this applies to. And it seems like the problem here is that this slave should not be forced to live in Chutz La'aretz.
Was
The
this
actual,
a Jewish owner?
yeah, it says,
Okay.
it said here, even though the master is an Israelite, since he ran away from outside of the land, he's not returned to him. And this is a Gentile slave. This is not a Jewish slave. Under no circumstances should he be made to go back to being a slave. So this is and it goes on to say, so as to allow him to reside in the place of purity chosen for the glorious assembly. The way they translate that into Hebrew, b'makom tahor hanivchar b'kibutz hanechbad. It was chosen for the honorable gathering. So it's sort of vague language, what he means by that. What does that mean, chosen for the glorious assembly? So you would think that the issue here is that Torah is ultimately best kept in Israel. In Chutz La'aretz, it is, obviously we still have to keep it, but it's not best kept there. First of all, there's a lot of mitzvahs that don't even apply outside of Israel. Plus, the Gemara has suggested in various places that there's a sense that a person's closer to assimilation, closer to idolatry, closer to subjugation by the nations. When they're outside of Eretz Yisrael, there's a statement, anybody who lives outside of Israel, it's as if he doesn't have a God, or it's as if he worships idols, those kind of statements. So it seems like that's the direction it's going in. We have seen before that that a Gentile slave has a kind of in-between status. He is not fully, or she is not fully a Gentile. For instance, he has a circumcision and goes to the mikvah. She would just go to the mikvah if it was a woman slave. And they are obliged to keep all the negative commandments, which means they have to keep kosher, they have to keep Shabbos, they have to they can't eat on Yom Kippur and things like that. So they have to keep all the negative commandments, and if they are freed, they are freed into Judaism. They automatically become Jewish if they are freed, even if they don't have. Usually, we say that as part of a conversion, a Gentile must accept upon themselves what we call Ol Malchus Shamayim, the yoke of heaven, which means the fulfillment of the mitzvos. So, and so this is an important part. This is maybe the biggest hurdle for somebody converting to Judaism, which is to succeed in convincing this Beis Din that they're going to be able to keep this yoke of heaven, and that they're committed to it. But this slave, that's not a part of their conversion process. Once they are freed, which can happen against their will, they're automatically Jewish. They are automatically Jewish.
I just want to make sure I want to make sure I'm hearing it right. Merely the freeing of a Gentile slave is sufficient to affect a conversion.
That is correct.
Wow. Okay.
In fact, there was, this has come up in a couple different times in history, but I would say a couple decades ago, I don't know if it was like 40 years ago, when it may have even been before the Reform movement, chose to recognize patrilineal descent, not just matrilineal descent. So if, according to the Reform movement, if a child is born of one Jewish parent, it doesn't matter if it's the father or the mother, that child would be considered Jewish. There were some other requirements, like the child be educated as a Jew or something, but it was understood at the time that's not going to be a deal breaker, and I've never heard it come up as a deal breaker. So I don't remember exactly how many years ago that was. That was like 40 or 50 years ago. When that declaration was made, that decision was made. So I don't know if it was right after that or a little bit before that, but there was a concern that there are going to be kids who consider themselves Jewish because they grew up that way. They don't know any better, and we're not going to know that technically, according to halacha, they're not Jewish, because maybe that first generation where the let's say the father married a woman who's a Gentile and she never converts. Let's say she never converts, but they decide to raise their child as a Jew, so that child is considered Jewish according to that patrilineal descent. So the first generation people who know the family would know that fact. But let's say you get like 3 generations down or 4 generations down. Are they going to know that 4 generations ago this is what happened? It's not that likely. So there was a concern that there's going to be a lot of these kids who are going to, or a lot of people that think they're Jewish and they're not. So this became like a kind of a crisis in the making. Therefore, there were a lot of people trying to strategize about what to do about it. Like I remember Rabbi Michal Twersky, should live long and in good health. I remember him telling me that there's going to be a time when we're going to probably have to have a Jewish registry. That in other words, that you could somehow get a kind of official registry stamp that says that you are Jewish, and then if somebody's not in that registry, they either have to prove that they are somehow, or they would have to convert. He was imagining possibly something like that. Yeah, so there was somebody who suggested this. In other words, what you could do is you could, and also this would work for Russians. This was another issue that came up in the 90s, which was that about 1 million Russians or people from the former Soviet Union moved to Israel. And the estimate was that at least 200,000 out of that million were not Jewish. That this was a way to get out of Russia. And so a lot of people took advantage of it, even though they weren't Jewish. So that means possibly that there are several 100,000 people who claimed to be Jewish but are not Jewish already in Israel. And this already has created a bunch of problems because these people, many of them, are so far from accepting the mitzvos, Ol Malchus Shamayim. They're so far from it. They're not going to change their lifestyle, and therefore they're not going to be able to convert, but they're going to serve in the Israeli army. This has already happened. They're going to serve in the Israeli army. Somebody's going to get killed in action, Rahman al-Islam, and then they're not going to be able to be buried in a Jewish cemetery. They're not going to be able to be buried in a military cemetery, a Jewish military cemetery, even though they gave up their life for Israel. They're not going to be able to get that because halachically they're not considered Jewish. This is a very touchy subject.
They're not considered Jewish because what again?
Their mother was not Jewish.
So they're not doing the patrilineal one.
So in Israel, they don't do the patrilineal descent. So the only group that does patrilineal descent are the American Reform Movement. The Reform Movement in Canada, in Europe, and in Israel do not recognize patrilineal descent. It's only the
Yeah,
Reform movement in America.
I have two questions.
Yeah.
One is, couldn't you consider being in Russia being a slave? Forget that. And the second was, does this slave who comes to Israel have to be you have to circumcise him, right? If he wasn't?
Right. So here's the thing, that they don't come as slaves, but what somebody suggested was, let's make them slaves. In other words, this is a way for them to become Jewish without having to keep Torah and mitzvahs.
How do you make someone a slave? You're a slave in Russia. You're a slave to them.
He's a Gentile. No, he has to halachically become a slave. He has to halachically be. He has to be bought by a Jewish person, and in the way that he would be considered his slave, and you have to legally be his slave, and then he would go through circumcision. Surprisingly, almost all the Russians were okay with doing circumcision, even as adults. It's like one of the miracles of the return of former Jews from the former Soviet Union to Israel. One of the big miracles was that almost all of them wanted to undergo a bris milah. So let's say, this could solve all these problems. Let's say you're talking about kids. Let's say these kids want to go to a Hebrew school or a day school or something like that. So you could do this. You could sell this kid into slavery and then free him, and he would automatically be Jewish, even though he doesn't accept Torah and mitzvahs, because this is the big barrier. They don't want to live as Orthodox Jews. Many of these people, so you can't convert them Orthodox. So what are you going to, if you can't convert them Orthodox Jews don't consider them Jewish. So this would bypass the need to accept an Orthodox Jewish lifestyle. You would just make them a slave, and then once they have the status of a slave, whoever is considered the owner of that slave would free them, and they would automatically now be a free Jewish person. And this, could sort of neatly solve this problem, because in Israel, let's say somebody joins the army, you would just tell them this is a technical thing we're going to go through just to make sure you're considered a Jewish 100%, and you go through this process. It would be a painless process. I mean, except for the circumcision, which again, it seems like for some reason the people from Russia were willing to do this. And then you'd solve this whole problem. They'd all be halachically considered Jewish, even though they didn't accept an Orthodox lifestyle.
I
So,
understand.
Yeah, go ahead.
I understand the advantages that accrue from this entire process, but what about the other side? If I'm now considered to be a Jew, am I chayav for violating the mitzvahs? I was freed. I didn't know anything. I went up to I had my cheeseburger the next morning. It was Yom Kippur. Do I get
You'd
kriya?
have to tell them that. You'd have to explain that to them, that that's what they're doing, but that's what they want to do. They want to be Jewish. And you would be saying to them, okay, we're going to consider you Jewish, but you should know when somebody's halakhically Jewish, they're supposed to keep Torah mitzvahs. This person says, I don't want to. So he's saying, just as long as you know that once you become Jewish, you're obliged to keep Torah mitzvahs, you could decide what you're going to do about that, but we're just telling you. And you would, so you're not bringing them into something without full disclosure. Now, they may not understand the consequences of what you're telling them, but they say they want it. They want to be able to marry Jewish people. They want their kids to be considered Jewish. They want to be buried in a Jewish cemetery. They want the law of return for their kids and all these kinds of things. Yeah.
But what if they don't want it at all?
Then fine. But they want. We're talking about people. Then they're not going to be considered Jewish. In Israel, they're not going to be considered Jewish. Let's talk about Israel right now. In Israel, it's clearly, you know clearly who's Jewish and who's not, according to the records. This person is going to be treated as a non-Jew. This person's not going to be able to marry a Jewish woman. This person's not going to be able to be buried in a Jewish cemetery, etc. They tell you they want to be Jewish. You tell them you can be Jewish, but you have to accept an Orthodox lifestyle. They say, forget it. Now, instead, you could say, look, this is another option. This is a kind of painless procedure, and you could even disclose fully. You will be Jewish, but you should know that being Jewish and not keeping the Torah and mitzvahs means that you've now accepted something, and there's consequences for not doing all these mitzvahs. I'm certain in 99% of those cases, they're going to say, I want to do it anyways. They see all the Jewish people they know who are not keeping Torah and mitzvahs. I guarantee you it would be 90-something% of the people. This was an argument that was made at the time, and it was made about both these circumstances. And but it was all dismissed. Now it was dismissed, and oftentimes the dismissal was accompanied with a quote from Rabbi Soloveitchik, who made this earlier about a different thing, who said that Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves. In other words, we're not going back to slavery, even if it solves a halachic problem. We're not going back to slavery. You can't go back to slavery. So it's not clear to me if he meant that in America, and that what he meant is dina de malchusa dina, that because the law of the land is you can't have slavery, you can't have slavery. That's possibly what he meant. I've never really done a deep dive into that statement, but it's often quoted that we're just not going there, even if it fixes things. Now, would that have to apply to Israel? What if Israel was willing to allow for slavery in this case, where it was a methodology for resolving the problem of Russians who who have this problem. Again, it was not accepted as a resolution of it, but it was brought up because of this feature that when a non-Jewish slave is freed, they automatically become Jewish, and they don't need Kabbalas or Malchus Shemaim. They're just automatically Jewish. So
Are there kids? If they have children, are they Jewish?
From then on, yeah. If if they had children before, they're not, but you could do the same thing with their children. I mean, you could just, let's say you have a woman and her children, because that's the scenario most likely you're going to have with it. Let's say you have a woman and her children. That doesn't have to be. But let's say it's woman and her children, so you could make them all slaves and then free them all, and then they would have the status of converts. Yeah, so it has that complexity that David brought up, which is if we're really concerned about the well-being of this person, we shouldn't be putting them in a situation where suddenly they're going to incur all these transgressions. But if they insist on it, and this is something that matters to them more than anything, this would solve the problem. Again, it was not accepted. It's not been accepted for either of them, and it's unlikely that it would ever be used, but it was brought up because of this feature. So it sounds like what we're reading so far, what it sounds like is, what the Rambam is saying is that since this slave, it already has like a a quasi-Jewish nature, which means that their relationship with God is different than that. It's not even like a Noahide. It's like a step above a Noahide, and possibly many steps above a Noahide. They have a right to live in the land of Israel, and therefore you're not allowed to send them out of the land of Israel. This, by the way, is also true about family members. Let's say there's the wife wants to live in Israel and the husband doesn't. So the court will force the husband to either move to Israel or give her a divorce, because she has a right to demand that they live. Everybody has a right to demand, pretty much, that they live in Israel. If they live in Chutz La'aretz, they have a right to demand it. And then again, if the family doesn't want to do it, they have a right to independently live there. So if this is a wife and the husband doesn't want to live there, he has to grant her a divorce. That's what the court would require. Yeah, there was a famous case. I don't know all the details of this case, but as it was presented to the public, there is a Rosh Yeshiva of Lakewood Yeshiva. His name is Rav Malkiel Cutler. So Rav Malkiel Cutler, several decades ago, like, I don't know, 50 years ago, 45, 50 years ago, he married the daughter of, I think it's a cousin of Rav Moshe Feinstein, is called Rav Michal Feinstein. He lived in Israel. And as part of the deal to marry his daughter, he had to agree that he was going to stay in Israel. They weren't going to move to Chutz La'aretz. And he made that deal. And then his father, who was Reb Shner Cutler, passed away, and Lakewood wanted him to become the Rosh Yeshiva of Lakewood Yeshiva. And it's like the biggest yeshiva in the world, and it's the most prestigious yeshiva. And it was his father's and his grandfather's. So he felt he needs to do this, but he had made this agreement, and his wife was not going to go with him. So I think what happened was she agreed that instead of a divorce, that he would do what's called heter mea rabbanim. I think what happened was she didn't want a divorce. She didn't want to move and she didn't want a divorce. I think that's what happened. So now, since Takonas Rabbeinu Gershom, so for the past like 1100 years, a man cannot divorce a wife against her will. She has to agree to the divorce. I think that was the detail. She wouldn't agree to a divorce, and she didn't want to leave Israel, and she can't be forced to leave Israel. So he got what they call a heter mea rabbanim, which is also included in that decree of Rabbeinu Gershom, which is, if you can get 100 rabbis to sign to make you an exception, you could have more than one wife. I think that's what ended up happening. But anyways, she can't be forced to leave Israel. And this is true always. No wife can be forced to leave Israel. And if she insists on wanting to live in Israel, she has to be allowed to live in Israel. And this is apparently true here also for a slave, even though they are still a Gentile slave. But it's this curious phrase at the end of this that makes it sound like the Rambam is recognizing that there is a special advantage to living in Israel. And that is because Israel was chosen to be the place where we gather. It is supposed to be where the Jewish people are. It sounds like that's what he's saying. The Ramban, Nachmanides, it seems to go even further and suggest that you have to keep Torah and mitzvos wherever you live, but if you're doing them outside of Israel, you're never doing the complete mitzvah. Mitzvahs were always meant to be kept in their best way in Israel. If you're outside of Israel, I think he characterized it as it's like practice for when you get to Israel. But it's not the same. Like for instance, let's say you keep Shabbos outside of Israel, it's not the real full keeping of that mitzvah. The only way to fully keep that mitzvah is in Israel. You did Yom Kippur outside of Israel, yeah, it's not, you still have to, but it's not a full keeping of the mitzvah. The mitzvah is designed to be kept in Israel. Outside of Israel, it's sort of like you're practicing so that when you get to Israel, you're going to be able to do it. That's according to the Ramban. But it sounds like even if the Rambam doesn't agree with that he uses this interesting language that so as to allow him to reside in the place of purity chosen for the glorious assembly. So I'm just going to try this and see if somebody talks about it. So I'm gonna be Devar mitzvos. Negative 254. Now in Hebrew. B'makom tahor hanivchar b'kibbutz hanachbad. Yeah. Hanivchar b'kibbutz. Part of our challenge here is that this is written in Arabic, so even the Hebrew is a translation, except that I'm assuming I'm assuming he saw this translation. I don't know that for sure. All right, so far, what they're saying is, this is from Chabad.org. Returning a runaway slave who flees Israel. So this is from Chabad.org. The 254th prohibition is that we are forbidden from returning to his master a servant who has fled to Israel. This applies even if the master is Jewish, since he has run to Israel from outside of Israel, should not be returned to him. Rather, he must be freed with his remaining value written down as a debt owed by the former servant to his former master. The source of this prohibition is God's statement, you must not return him back to his master. It is explained in the 4th chapter of Tractate Gittin that this verse refers to a servant who has run to Israel from outside of Israel, that a document is written regarding his monetary value, that a liberation document is written for him, and that since he has come to dwell in the pure land, which was chosen for the holy people, he shall never be returned to servitude. The details of this mitzvah are explained here. Yeah, so he's just, did that help really? I guess the way they're now referring to it, they're saying, since he has come to dwell in the pure land, which was chosen for the holy people. It's getting closer, but it's not entirely saying. The phrase points to a qualitative difference in the religious environment and spiritual. Aish.com. The land of Israel is central to Judaism. It is an intrinsic part of the covenant of God promised to Abraham. The mitzvah to live in Israel is based on the verse, you shall possess the land and dwell in it. The Talmud states a person who walks 4 amot in Israel is assured of him he is one deserving of the world to come. The question, however, is whether this mitzvah is compulsory in our times when the Holy Temple is not standing. This is the basis of a dispute between 2 great Talmudic commentaries, Maimonides and Nachmanides. The general approach, so according to the Rambam, a leading twin says, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein concludes that living in Israel is a mitzvah kiyuma. In other words, it is a mitzvah to live there, but you don't have to live there. The general approach today is that if both places are equally livable, one should make the effort to live in Israel. Every year, approximately 3,000 Jews make Aliyah from North America. Nachmanides knew that he would have to endure great difficulty and come to Israel due to the primitive travel conditions and plagues that often broke out on the way. Nevertheless, at the age of 72, he made the ascent. When he came to Jerusalem, he was struck with both awe and grief, awe that he was standing in a place where Isaac was bound in the altar, where Jacob dreamt the ladder, where King Solomon built the holy temple, but grieved by the fact that the entire city lay in ruins. A recent attack by Mongols had left Jerusalem with only 2,000 survivors and barely a million of Jews. When he saw the desolation, he tore his clothes to mourn Jerusalem's destruction. He had come to Israel to achieve a higher purpose. The Talmud says that a person who dwells in the diaspora is like one who worships idols. The commentators explains that it is important to live in the right moral and spiritual environment, even if this means sacrificing material comforts. One who doesn't follow this path is as if he's living under the aegis of negative forces. Furthermore, many commentators apply. For example, the mitzvahs of Truma Meiser. Yeah, of course, those only apply in Israel. Yeah, it does not. Yeah, so this is an example of perplexity. Oh, here we go. Let's see about this guy. Ahon Meir. When I was a student at ITRI, we had a mashgiach whose name was Rabbi Yoel Schwartz of blessed memory. And he was a great Torah scholar. And I remember the first time I was going back to America for Pesach, I went up to him to say goodbye, and I told him I'm going to America for Pesach, and he goes, "It's forbidden. You're not allowed to leave Eretz Yisrael." It was so pusha to him. That so, yeah. So he doesn't. This is not explaining it. Yeah. I need more time to find out what that means. It certainly looks from our mitzvah like the Rambam considers it qualitatively a different religious experience to be in Israel. And that's why you can't send him back. Even if he doesn't hold you have to. That's not even for sure. I mean, there are some people who argue that he does feel you have to if you can. Just during his time, he couldn't. But he doesn't write that. And he doesn't have the mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael. It's not one of the 613. But it is a very studied issue what he thinks about it. But here it does seem to be that he holds that there's some kind of qualitative difference between mitzvah observance in Israel and outside of Israel, and that's why you can't send the slave back. All right. So I'm looking forward to continue tomorrow. And
It would be nice if
yeah.
the Tanny court read the Torah.
If the what court?
The ones who decided the Dred Scott decision
Yeah.
on returning slaves.
Yeah, that is such an embarrassing moment.
It just seems that we're taking now the notion of Eretz Yisrael. We would think that it would be something that it's our heritage that was specifically selected for the Jewish people. But now the connection seems to be broader. Now it seems all mankind flourishes.
Well, not here. It's a slave may be different because they've already made this qualitative adjustment. In other words, they are in this middle stage. For instance, they have to keep all negative commandments. So they're in what you might call a ambiguous middle. And that's why it might be important for them, but may not be for the average Gentile. Yeah, because you never see anything about that with Gentiles. That is
but you
a
always
question.
hear about about Goyim. They say for some reason on Saturday the food tastes better. It's an old rabbinic saying.
Yeah, but like we even say a Gentile's not allowed to keep Shabbos.
No,
because it's a special sign of Jewishness. Yeah.
Sorry?
Yeah, I hear your question. And it's a good question. My first thought is that just because it says this about a slave doesn't mean it would be true about Gentiles in general, because slaves have this qualitative difference. They're sort of in between. All right, we could talk more about this tomorrow and then move on to more about slaves. I like to always say when we talk about slaves that we are not going to have slaves in the future. We certainly don't agree to slavery now. We're not going to have slaves in the future, but they did have slaves, and when they did, these were the laws. Okie dokie.
Thank you, Rabbi.
All right. Be well,
Tomorrow
guys. All
or
right.
tonight.
Tonight and tomorrow. Yeah. All right. Be well. Bye-bye.